Let's rewind the tape. Static flickers, a grainy VHS logo warps across the screen, and the opening synth hits you in the chest like an electric pulse from the past. You don't just watch a John Carpenter movie, you feel it. That eerie, minimal score, that creeping camera, the anti-hero cigarette burn smirk. You're not safe, and you're not supposed to be. Welcome to Retrowaved, where nostalgia isn't just a memory, it's an experience. Today, we're diving into the neon-drenched shadows, where paranoia breathes down your neck and the bass line hums like a heartbeat. This isn't just about movies. It's about atmosphere. It's about revolution. It's about the one man behind Halloween, The Thing, Escape from New York, They Live, and so many more. John Carpenter. Because Carpenter didn't just direct cult classics. He scored them. He edited them. He wrote them. He painted the whole damn vibe, from frame one to the final synth note. This is a guy who could make a $300,000 indie flick feel like a Hitchcockian fever dream. A guy who turned B-movie premises into A-tier nightmares. A guy who defined not just a genre, but a mood. We're talking about the godfather of lo-fi terror, the prophet of dystopian cool, the rebel auteur with a cigarette in one hand and a Korg synth in the other. Before we talk monsters, masks, or mirrored sunglasses, we've got to talk about the sound. Because Carpenter's sound is its own character. You hear that pulsing synth, just 2 or 3 notes, and your heart drops. The walls close in. You know you're in one of his worlds. His scores weren't about virtuosity. They were about a vibe. Simple, repetitive, hypnotic, but layered with dread and anticipation. He wasn't trying to be John Williams. He was trying to be a punk rock Morricone. And in doing so, he created one of the most iconic horror scores of all time, the Halloween theme. A 5/4 signature time loop that somehow never gets old. It feels like it's watching you, waiting. The sound is the scare. But it's not just Halloween. Go back and listen to the opening theme from Assault on Precinct 13, or the electric drone that haunts the fog, or the icy, isolating throb in The Thing. Carpenter built sonic landscapes that matched the mood of his movies. Tense, minimal, unpredictable. He'd often say, if you want it done right, do it yourself. And in Carpenter's case, that included the music. Born in 1948 in Carthage, New York, John Howard Carpenter grew up loving monster flicks and westerns. By the time he was in film school at USC, the 70s film revolution was erupting. Scorsese, Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas, and Carpenter was carving his own weird path through the chaos. He didn't want to be the next studio guy. He wanted to be the guy outside the studio, smoking a cigarette, flipping the bird to the executives, and still delivering gold. His first film, in 1974, was titled Dark Star. It was a sci-fi student project co-written with Dan O'Bannon, who would go on to write Alien. It was weird, low budget, existential, and shot for peanuts. But it had Carpenter DNA, a sharp sense of irony, slow burn pacing, and DIY effects that punched above their weight. Then came Assault on Precinct 13 in 1976, a modern western disguised as an urban siege thriller. It was raw, gritty, minimal, and scored by Carpenter himself, of course. He took Rio Bravo, stripped out the cowboy hats, and replaced them with street gangs and empty hallways. It was clear, Carpenter didn't need huge budgets. He didn't even really need the stars. He just needed the room to work. And in 1978, he got it. There's before Halloween, and then there's after Halloween. Shot on a shoestring budget of $325,000, Halloween wasn't just a slasher film. It was the slasher film. It created a blueprint. The final girl, the silent killer, the Steadicam POV shots, the unstoppable evil. But more than that, it was all about the mood. The creeping camera, the cold autumn air, the faceless mask with nothing behind it. It was Hitchcock meets Grindhouse, and audiences were shook. Michael Myers wasn't scary because he jumped out of closets. He was scary because he didn't blink, because the camera never cut, because that theme drilled into your skull like a metronome counting down your life. The film exploded. It made $70 million worldwide and turned Carpenter into the king of indie horror. But here's the thing. He didn't want a franchise. He wanted Halloween to be a one-off, a terrifying morality tale. But the studio smelled blood and money. Carpenter walked away from the sequels, only reluctantly writing Halloween 2. That says everything about his mindset. Carpenter never chased cash. He chased stories, atmosphere, control. And when he couldn't get it, he'd rather walk. In 1981, Carpenter dropped Escape from New York, a grimy, future noir fever dream about a dystopian America that turns Manhattan into a prison colony. Enter Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell in an eye patch, cigarette permanently attached to his lip. It was Mad Max meets spaghetti western. It was anti-establishment cool. It was 80s punk energy dialed to 11. And it cemented two things: Carpenter's obsession with authority and rebellion, and his partnership with Kurt Russell. That relationship would define much of Carpenter's 80s run. Together, they'd bend genres, subvert expectations, and deliver some of the most iconic cult films of all time. But before we get there, the fog was rolling in. In 1980, Carpenter released The Fog, a ghost story wrapped in an atmosphere of maritime dread. Critics were lukewarm. The movie aged like wine. Today, it's praised for pacing, cinematography, and yes, the sound. In 1982, Carpenter dropped The Thing, a bleak, snowbound masterpiece about a shape-shifting alien terrorizing an isolated research station, starring Kurt Russell with a flamethrower and a beard thick enough to start its own revolution. The film was cold, paranoid, nihilistic, and horrifically brilliant. And yet, it bombed. Badly. Why? Because it came out the same year as E.T. Audiences didn't want bleak. They wanted finger glows and bicycle rides across the moon. Carpenter's film, dripping with gore, distrust, and one of the most terrifying creatures in cinema history, was too much. Too dark, too hopeless, too real. But time changes everything. Today, The Thing is widely regarded as a horror masterpiece. Its practical effects by Rob Bottin are still jaw-dropping. Its story structure, where anyone could be the enemy, is endlessly relevant. The blood test scene alone, legendary. Carpenter later admitted that the film's failure shook him. It hurt, but he didn't stop. He went full throttle. Later in 1983, Carpenter took on Christine, an adaptation of Stephen King's novel about a haunted car with a jealous streak. It was a step back into the supernatural, both Carpenter's signature visual control and musical sense of dread. Christine isn't as celebrated as Carpenter's other work, but it's purely him. The camera glides like a stalker. The synth score turns a 58 Plymouth Fury into a character. It's weird, sad, violent, and somehow tender. Like so much of Carpenter's work, it explored obsession, how power can corrupt, how love can turn possessive, how identity can vanish behind obsession. Even though it wasn't his most successful studio effort at the time, audiences showed up. Critics came around, but Carpenter still felt the squeeze. He didn't want to be a director for hire. He wanted to make his own weird dreams. So when the opportunity came to reteam with Kurt Russell and go full Luxeria Western sci-fi fantasy, he didn't blink. Imagine this pitch in a 1986 studio boardroom. It's a martial arts ghost story set in San Francisco's Chinatown with ancient sorcerers, sewer monsters, neon swords, a bumbling white truck driver, and mystical kung fu warriors who ride lightning. The execs blink, and Carpenter grins. Enter Big Trouble in Little China, one of the most chaotic, genre-bending, utterly entertaining films of the 1980s. And yet again, it bombed. Audiences didn't know what to do with it. Critics were split. Was it racist? Satirical? Stupid? Brilliant? It was all of those things. And none of them. Kurt Russell's Jack Burton is an anti-hero in its purest Carpenter mold. All talk, little competence, but somehow magnetic. The real hero is Wang Chi, his stoic, badass sidekick. But Jack's there, in his tank top and cowboy boots, making noise and cracking jokes. This was Carpenter's wildest swing yet. His tribute to Asian action cinema, his pushback against the formula, his love letter to chaos. And like so much of his work, it didn't find its audience until years later. Today, Big Trouble in Little China is a cult staple, quoted, cosplayed, worshipped. But at the time, it was just another failure. By 1987, Carpenter was done with studio interference. He went low budget again, guerrilla, independent. And that's when things got really weird. Prince of Darkness is one of Carpenter's most underrated films, a slow, strange, apocalyptic fever dream about a group of scientists and priests uncovering the liquid essence of Satan in an abandoned church. Yeah, you heard that right. It's a film about evil as quantum physics, about the blurring of faith and science, about dreams from the future, and mirror portals, and bugs, and Donald Pleasance sweating in a basement. The budget was tiny. The cast was tight. The vibes are off the charts. Carpenter's score? Cold, metallic, endless. This was the director unchained, doing exactly what he wanted. No studio notes, no market testing, just pure Carpenter. And while it didn't blow up at the box office, it became another slow burn classic, a film that feels especially haunting in the age of conspiracy theories and viral anxiety. And then, they live. 1988, Roddy Piper, Keith David, an 8-minute alley fight. I've come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. Let's be clear. They Live isn't just a B-movie. It's a sledgehammer. A scathing satire of capitalism, conformity, and Reagan-era consumerism. It's about the invisible machine behind your daily life. About billboards screaming, obey. About aliens in business suits. About the illusion of choice. It's also hilarious. Cheap, silly, violent, and deeply aware of its own campiness. The film follows Nada, a drifter who discovers sunglasses that lets him see the world's secret truth. That the rich are aliens, and we're all sleepwalking through mind control. The fight between Piper and Keith David, it's not just legendary because of the choreography. It's about resistance, about waking up, about convincing someone, anyone, to see what you see. They Live wasn't a huge hit, but like everything Carpenter touched in the 80s, it aged like prophecy. And today, it feels more relevant than ever. By the end of the 1980s, Carpenter was creatively on fire, but commercially, he was radioactive. Studios did not want him. Audiences didn't trust him. And Carpenter, he was tired. He spent a decade making bold, visionary films that the world only appreciated years later. He was always too early and always too weird. And yet, he never compromised, never watered it down, never played it safe. John Carpenter was punk before punk had a camera. And even though he slipped in the shadows of the 1990s, his legacy was already written. His films were being rediscovered on VHS, on late-night cable, on bootlegs traded like secret weapons. The cult was growing. And Carpenter, he knew. He always knew. By the time the 1990s rolled in, John Carpenter had already done what most directors can only dream of. He changed the language of genre. He made horror creepier, sci-fi grittier, action cooler, and sound design more minimalist and hypnotic. His cult was growing. His legend was solidifying. But Carpenter, he was tired. Not creatively, never that, but emotionally, financially, existentially. He spent a decade battling studios, dodging bad reviews, defending his work while watching lesser directors get the shine. He was the patron saint of the misunderstood, and in the 90s, the grind finally started wearing him down. Still, even when he pulled back, he didn't quit. He just got weirder, darker, more self-reflective. Let's start with the last great entry in the Carpenter canon. Released in 1995, In the Mouth of Madness is Carpenter's most meta, cerebral, and existentially disturbing film. And depending on who you ask, it's also his last true masterpiece. It stars Sam Neill as John Trent, an insurance investigator tasked with finding a missing horror novelist, Sutter Kane, whose books are driving readers insane. What follows is a descent into madness, unreality, and collapsing fiction, where the borders between the page and the real world disintegrate. It's part Lovecraft, part King, part Twilight Zone fever dream, and all Carpenter. This film wasn't just horror. It was about horror, about authorship, about the power of belief, about what happens when a story becomes so powerful it rewrites reality. It's chilling, it's cerebral, and it's got that trademark Carpenter blend. Synth score, creeping dread, isolated characters losing their grip on sanity. Critics weren't sure what to make of it, again. But fans, they got it. And today, In the Mouth of Madness is widely considered one of Carpenter's best, and the final chapter of his unofficial Apocalypse trilogy, following The Thing and The Prince of Darkness. 3 films, 3 worlds, all unraveling in different ways. In Carpenter, he was slipping out the side door. Before Madness, Carpenter took one last swing at studio comedy with 1992's Memoir of an Invisible Man, starring Chevy Chase. It was a mess. Not because Carpenter forgot how to direct, but because it wasn't his. He was brought in after the original director dropped out. The script was shaky. The tone was confused. and Chase reportedly made production a living hell. The film flopped. Carpenter hated the experience, and after years of telling stories on his own terms, this was a reminder of why he never fit the mold. He went back into his cave, and in that cave, he found vampires. 1998, John Carpenter's Vampires. Forget the gothic castles and tortured romance. These bloodsuckers were sweaty, nasty, western-drenched monsters. And the film? It was pure Carpenter grit. Starring James Woods as a vampire slayer with a truck full of wooden stakes and a leather attitude. Vampires felt like a bar brawl between horror and spaghetti western. The good guys weren't really good, and the bad guys were really bad. And the desert sun beat down like a spotlight from hell. This wasn't just another vampire flick. It was Carpenter doing what he loved, subverting expectations, making the priest a sidekick, turning the hero into a cranky psycho, letting the world feel used up. The film had some cult appreciation, but again, the movie didn't move at the box office, and the industry had changed. Horror was going slick, studio-controlled, CGI-heavy. Carpenter's dusty, analog style didn't fit anymore. He could see the future, and he did not like it. 2001, Ghosts of Mars. This one hurt. It had the elements, a cool premise, space cops versus ancient Martian spirits, a tough female lead, and even Ice Cube with a flamethrower. It should have worked. It should have. But something was off. The tone was uneven. The visuals didn't land. The scares were muted. And worst of all, it felt tired. Carpenter later admitted that he was burned out. He had nothing left in the tank. After Ghost of Mars flopped, he walked away from directing altogether. For nearly a decade, he went silent. Not bitter, not defeated, just done. He'd given everything. The atmosphere, the music, the control, the vision. He carved a legacy from the margins, and the system kept pushing back. So he let go. But here's the kicker. While Carpenter stepped away from the camera, his influence exploded. You could see him in everything. In the rise of synthwave and retrofuturism, in the minimalist horror scores of filmmakers like David Robert Mitchell, in the practical creature effects renaissance, and basically the entire show of Stranger Things. Filmmakers lined up to name drop him. Quentin Tarantino, Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, Robert Rodriguez, Jordan Peele. His fingerprints were everywhere, even in video games. Dead Space, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, all draw on Carpenter's sense of isolation, dread, and tension. He became a godfather, a myth, a blueprint. Not bad for a guy who made a $300,000 film in 1978 and scored it in his garage. And when Carpenter finally returned, it wasn't behind the camera. It was on a stage. In the 2010s, he leaned full tilt into his other identity, composer. With the help of his son Cody and godson Daniel Davies, he released a series of albums, Lost Themes, Anthology, and more. He toured, played concerts, basked in the love that the film world had once denied him. And the music? It was awesome. It was synth, it was retro, it was new, it was so Carpenter. He wasn't chasing the box office anymore. He was scoring his own imaginary movies, creating his own vibe, owning his legacy. He even came back to help with the 2018 Halloween reboot, scoring the film and acting as executive producer. It was poetic, full circle, and for once, everyone gave him his flowers. He deserved it. Let's talk about style. Because Carpenter didn't just make movies, you felt them. You could recognize a John Carpenter film without seeing a single face. All you needed was a few seconds of slow camera movement, cold synth pulse, a wide shot of empty streets or wind-blown wastelands, and boom, you were there. That's the power of his style. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't over-directed, it was patient, methodical, unnerving. Carpenter was not trying to wow you with camera tricks. He was trying to trap you inside of his world. He wanted you stuck in the hallway with Michael Myers, unsure where your next shadow would flicker. And it worked. Let's break it down. Carpenter loved the 2.35 by 1 anamorphic widescreen ratio. He wasn't shooting for television, he was painting cinematic canvases. Even with tiny budgets, he made his movies look huge by using every inch of the frame. But it wasn't about the width, it was about the isolation. In Halloween, characters walked through wide suburban neighborhoods that felt too quiet. In The Thing, Men drift across vast snowscapes, dwarfed by white nothingness. In Escape from New York, Manhattan is a shadowy prison, filled with flickering lights and silent tension. These environments don't just serve the story, they are the story. They reflect the mental states of the characters, cold, empty, dangerous. And the camera, it often glides, slowly, deliberately, like it's stalking the characters, watching, waiting. That restraint, that icy patience, it's terrifying. You could argue that John Carpenter's sound was just as influential as the look, maybe more so. Before Carpenter, horror scores were largely orchestral. Think Bernard Herrmann in Psycho. Think big, sweeping strings. But Carpenter changed the game. He went lo-fi. He went electronic. He went minimal. Why? Because he had to. He couldn't afford an orchestra. So he did what any resourceful DIY filmmaker would do. He scored the films himself, using synthesizers and sequencers. It wasn't just necessity. It became identity. Think about the Halloween theme. It's 5 notes. No bass drop, no violins, just a steady pulsing loop in 5/4 time. But it makes your blood run cold. It feels mechanical, inevitable, unstoppable. He carried that into everything. Escape from New York, The Fog, Prince of Darkness, They Live. Each score was like a heartbeat you couldn't escape. And now, that sound is everywhere. Today's synthwave, darkwave, and retro-futuristic music scenes basically live in the world Carpenter created. Let's look at artists like Kavinsky, Power Glove, Gunship, Carpenter Brute, yes, named after him. They all owe a sonic debt to Carpenter. The man didn't just influence horror, he birthed a genre of music. And now, he tours as a musician. The 2010s saw him release Lost Themes, albums of original music for movies that don't exist. And they slap. He played festivals, dropped vinyls, lit up the stage with synths and shadows. People came to watch a director play music. That says it all. Let's talk characters. John Carpenter might be the greatest anti-hero builder in film history. Not the originator, but the architect of the modern model. Think about Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. He's not a good guy. He's not trying to save anyone. He's just trying to survive. He's a loner, a criminal, but he's cool. You root for him, even when he's growling and snarling and flipping off the government. Then there's Nada and They Live, a homeless drifter with no backstory, no family, no clear motivation. But the second he puts on those sunglasses and sees the world for what it is, he becomes a rebel prophet. Even Laurie Strode in Halloween is an inversion. She's the final girl, but not because she's flawless. She's traumatized, overmatched, and trapped. She's real. Carpenter's characters don't spout exposition. They exist, and they survive. That kind of stripped-down character work paved the way from everything from The Terminator to Drive to John Wick. Quiet killers, reluctant heroes, stoic rebels. That's not just what they say, it's how they carry the silence. There's something punk about Carpenter, not in the mohawk and safety pins kind of way, but in the attitude, the defiance, the refusal to play by the rules. He didn't do press junkets. He didn't kiss the ring. He wasn't trying to get an Oscar. He was trying to do it his way, even when it cost him. And now, that energy is everywhere. Every indie horror director with a $50,000 budget and dreams is channeling Carpenter. Every synth-heavy thriller, every slow-burn story about dread creeping in the walls. Directors like Robert Eggers, David Robert Mitchell, Ty West, Panos Cosmatos. They're carrying the Carpenter torch, keeping the vibe alive, telling the stories that take time, building the dread, and never explaining too much. Because that's the thing. Carpenter respected the audience. He didn't spoon-feed. He didn't monologue. He let the vibe do the talking. And now, that's the standard for cool. You can feel Carpenter's fingerprints in more than just movies and music. His entire aesthetic, grimy, neon, analog gear, worn denim, dim streetlights, CRT monitors, malfunctioning radios, has become a whole visual language. It's in fashion editorials, Instagram filters, YouTube vaporwave compilations, graphic design, indie video games, and even this podcast. His worlds, urban decay mixed with futurism, are the perfect metaphor for our nostalgia-obsessed culture. They feel like a future we've already lived through. a timeline that broke and kept rewinding. It's hard to find another filmmaker whose work has so thoroughly infected the collective creative unconscious. John Carpenter didn't just leave a mark, he left a map, and thousands of artists are still walking that path. We've walked through the fog, crossed frozen wastelands, worn the sunglasses, lit the match, and now we're here, and the closing credits of a legacy that's not just cinematic, but cultural. Because John Carpenter isn't just a director, he's a vibe, a philosophy, a resistance movement, and a leather jacket. He didn't chase fame. He didn't build franchises. He didn't make movies to please the boardroom. He made them because he had something to say. And more importantly, a feeling to share. A world to construct, a dread to linger. And while the world didn't always get it, eventually, it did. If there's one defining theme of Carpenter's career, it's this. Misunderstood in the moment, revered in the rear view. From The Thing to Big Trouble in Little China, he dropped film after film critics shrugged off and box offices ignored, only to have those same works hailed as masterpieces decades later. That's not failure, that's vision. That's being early. It's easy to forget that most of Carpenter's best work flopped when it hit the theaters. Today, they're part of a cultural bloodstream, referenced, quoted, remade, revered. And you know what? He didn't let it break him. He didn't chase validation. He just kept making stuff, smaller, weirder, and more personal. That's the punk energy. That's what made him a legend. Let's talk about why his stories hit so hard. Because it's not just about monsters or killers or dystopias. Carpenter's best films are about control, about power, about the invisible systems running the world, and how we either fight them or succumb. And They Live, the message is on the nose. Literal aliens controlling humanity through consumerism. But in The Thing, it's more existential. You might be the enemy. You just don't know it yet. In Halloween, evil isn't explained. It's just there. It's watching. That's real fear. Not jump scares, not gore, but the idea that something larger is always looming and that you might be powerless to stop it. And yet, Carpenter's characters fight anyway. They might lose. They might not even understand what they're fighting, but they fight. And that's what makes his work feel so alive, so timeless, so needed. In a world where content is pumped out like factory sludge, where franchises eat originality and algorithms dictate tone, Carpenter stands as a monolith to what a real voice looks like. He didn't have an IP. He was the IP. He wasn't selling toys or sequels. He was selling atmosphere, ambiguity, mood. He believed in the audience's intelligence. He made films that struck you in the brain because he didn't tell you everything. We live in an age where everything's explained. Everything is engineered. Everything's pre-visualized to death. And then there's Carpenter. Low budget, cigarette lit, synth echoing off the walls saying, "Nah, let's keep it weird." We need that, especially now. So where is he now? John Carpenter is, fittingly, a little like one of his characters. Off the grid, enigmatic, vibing with his music, occasionally stepping back into the spotlight when it suits him. He plays video games. He watches basketball. He talks to fans at conventions. And when he shows up, people listen. Because the cult never died. It just got louder, smarter, bigger. The kids who watch The Thing on cable at 2 a.m. are now the ones directing the new wave. The synth kids became full-grown composers. The weirdos, they won. Carpenter didn't chase the mainstream, but the mainstream came crawling back to him. Because in the end, he was right all along. Atmosphere matters. Mood matters. Tone matters. Doing it your way matters. He showed us that horror could be art, that sci-fi could be personal, that action could be anti-authority, that fear doesn't always need a reason. And through it all, he never stopped being himself. The man, the myth, the Korg wizard in the shadows. So what do we take away from all this? That vision doesn't always pay off in the moment, but it lasts. That telling your story your way, even when nobody understands it, is the most punk rock thing you can do. That sometimes the most powerful statement is a steady camera, a slow zoom, a note that holds just a second too long. Carpenter taught us to embrace the unknown, to stare into the fog and keep walking, to blast a signal even when you're not sure who's listening, because someone is. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday. And when they do, your work just won't be remembered.
It'll be retrowaved.